Strengths is one of the key areas of research in positive psychology. And research into trauma tells us that people who explore their strengths and recognize what allowed them to survive their trauma actually helps them to cope better and to recover after a traumatic experience. If you'd like to find out a little bit more about strengths and positive psychology, then stick around. Hello, my name is Elfreda Vaughan of Metta-morphics, and this video series is for people who've experienced some kind of hardship or highly stressful event in their life and often wonder if there's something wrong with it because of how they react or how they experience the world. And I want to reassure you to tell you that under the circumstances, you're totally freaking normal. This video is about strengths, and it's one of the key areas in positive psychology of research, which explores the fact that we all have a number of strengths that we utilize in our life to help us to cope with things, to help us to be successful, to have healthy relationships, and to experience high levels of well-being. Now, the research into strengths focuses specifically on something called the VIA character strengths. And you can do a measure of those or a test of those. There's links below if you'd like to find out what your strengths are. But these 24 strengths are strengths that seem to be universal across several countries where it's been researched. And they're divided into certain categories of wisdom and transcendence and many other things. And so the 24 strengths have things like creativity and love of learning, honesty, fairness, perseverance, many others that help us to recognize how we do things and how well we do things and to capitalize on those strengths. I'll put some images where you'll be able to see exactly what those strengths are. And obviously, if you go and you do the measures, you'll be able to find out your strengths for yourself. So when you do a VIA character strengths test, it gives you your top strengths. So it divides the 24 down according to which you use the most. You're having a top 5, a top 10, obviously. And so those few in the beginning don't vary a whole lot. You may find if you do the measure again in a couple of years' time, there'll be some movement in those top 10. But unless you focus specifically on improving one, you'll find that your strengths stay pretty stable over time. And so when we recognize that we have these strengths, then we can often use them to our advantage, recognizing as well that they're clearly linked to our values. So for example, one of my strengths would be honesty and another would be fairness. And they're very closely linked to my own values. And originally the VIA was called values in action. And those values drive a huge amount of my behavior. So I have to be aware that if I want things to go well for me, if I want to be successful, then I need to be conscious of those strengths and use them because obviously they align with my values and who I am. And you may find that you'll have other strengths. But the thing that's interesting when it comes to trauma is that the research in trauma-informed care certainly tells us that when we help people to utilize their strengths or recognize what has helped them to survive through their trauma, such as their resilience or their coping abilities, helps them to recover. And so in coaching in positive psychology, we often use strengths, but not necessarily the 24 of the VIA. We can use strengths by helping people to recognize their own strengths. And this links very closely to my last video and post-traumatic growth, where I talk about personal strengths. So over time, we start to recognize that we have good coping abilities, that we've been able to handle things. For me, certainly, I've mentioned this in other videos, but hypervigilance is one of the byproducts of complex post-traumatic stress disorder and one that I have. But over time, I've begun to recognize that as a strength, that my ability to be hypervigilant has supported me as a coach in being able to recognize when there is things that are unspoken between me and somebody I'm working with. It also helps me when I work as a teacher and a trainer to be aware of what's going on in the room because it makes my attention quite acute. And so something that could be seen as maybe a negative thing can become a strength over time when we begin to recognize that. And so when we focus on our strengths, we begin to feel better. We recognize that there are things that we are good at, that we realize that it is through maybe a perseverance, which happens to be a strength, that we've been able to handle the ongoing stress that maybe have been emerging in your life during times of trauma. It may be that you're able to think clearly or think on your feet. And so if you experienced a sudden stressful event, that you would be able to handle that event and make good decisions and be focused. and be present. And so when we focus on our strengths, we start to feel better, and we start to recognize how we can use those strengths to our advantage. Now, sometimes people look at strengths that aren't dominant in them and try and improve them, but more recently research says that actually takes up a lot more effort, and we're far better to find what's good in us and use that as much as we can. So if you do the VIA and you find out, and there's two places you can do that, that's on the viacharacter.org, or you can do it on the Authentic Happiness website. It's Martin Seligman's website, and you'll be able to test yourself there. And in doing those tests, you'll be able to see, oh, I have these strengths, and therefore maybe I need to engage in them more. So for example, love of learning is one of mine. And so I realized that actually makes me feel happy. It makes me feel good. And so I engage in learning on a regular basis. Being honest makes you feel good. It all improves our well-being. But not only that, it helps us certainly from a recognition of our personal strengths, understanding how we've been able to handle things, why we've been able to cope, and what helps us to continue to be successful. So if you haven't done your VIA character test yet, I recommend you do, because it's very, very interesting, and you can do it quite regularly. You can do it for free, or you can do a paid version if you want more details. But apart from that, take a little bit of time, if you can, to think about what is it that you do well, what are you successful at that supports you in your life and that makes you feel good. And when times are hard, then you can recognize that they are resources that you have within you that can support you to handle difficult times. If you want to find out more about what I do, or if you'd like to work with me as a coaching client, then please get in touch. My website is below. You can book a free session with me to have a chat. If you have any comments, I'd love to see them in the comment section. I'll happily reply. If you want to just reach out to me privately to have a chat, then please do. I'm more than happy to respond or answer any questions that you have. And remember, whatever you're going through, whether you feel that you're dealing with things in an odd way, or maybe you don't feel like you fit in, that under the circumstances, you're totally freaking normal.